I'm the founder and also the chair or chief executive officer from Victorina Press, which is based in Staffordshire, and we publish books in English, Spanish, and bilingual English-Spanish. And I'm here to chair this panel of 5 distinguished translators and also publishers. And we are going to talk about translation as a human activity, but one that gives also the chance to connect with other cultures and peoples, etc. So I'm not going to go on about this because we have very little time, and if I interrupt people, these people, I mean, it's not because I want to, but it's because we only have now 40 minutes. And we have 5 people who want to talk about this. And then we will leave a little bit of time for the questions and answers from you. Okay, let me introduce these people then. Isabel del Rio, over there, is a British-Spanish writer and linguist. Born in Madrid, she has lived in London most of her life. She has a 5-year licenciatura from the Universidad Complutense. She's currently doing a PhD in creative writing. She was a full-time journalist for the BBC World Service and a full-time translator and terminologist in a London-based UN agency for over 2 decades. She has published fiction and poetry in both English and Spanish, including La Duda, Paradise and Hell, and A Woman Alone, fragments of a memoir. Her poetry includes Madrid, 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 Dolorem Ipsum, and Cuaderno de Notas. She's also a literary translator, and her most recent translation is The Secret Garden by F.H. Burnett into Spanish. Isabel is the co-founder of the independent imprint Friends of Alice Publishing. Then we have Leo Boix, who is a bilingual Latinx poet born in Argentina who lives and works in the UK. His debut English collection, Ballad of a Happy Immigrant, was selected as one of the best 5 books of poetry by The Guardian in August 21. He has authored another 2 books in Spanish, Un Lugar Propio in 2015 and Mar de Noche 2017. His book, To Love a Woman 2022, is a collection of poems by the Argentine queer writer Diana Bellesi, and that book received a Pen Translate Prize. His poems have appeared in many national and Arts Council national scheme to nurture new voices of Latinx writers in the UK. He received the Bart Wolf Poetry Award in 2018 and the Keats Shelley Prize in 2019. He was awarded the Society of Authors Foundation and K. Blandwell Trust Award. Adam Feinstein, on this side, is a British author, poet, translator, journalist, film critic, and autism researcher. His biography of Chilean poet Pablo Neruda, titled Pablo Neruda, A Passion for Life, was published in 2004 and later in 2013. His recent book, Unknown Neruda, was published in 2019. In 2020, he published the translation of the poetry of Nicaraguan poet Rubén Darío. He broadcasts regularly for the BBC and writes for The Guardian, The Observer, The Financial Times, and the Times Literary Supplement. His own poems and translations of Neruda, Federico García Lorca, Mario Benedetti, and others have appeared in many magazines, including Agenda, Acumen, PN Review, Poem, and Modern Poetry in Translation. And let me turn this. Camilla Reeve, over there, is a British poet and novelist. She is the founder and editor at Palewell Press Limited, and also mentors students in secondary schools and universities. Her poetry collections are Travels of a Spider, Traveling East by Road and Soul, Raft and Puffins, Poems for Scomer Island, and Tales from Two Cities. Her poems and short stories have appeared in various anthologies and journals. Camilla enjoys performing her work alongside fellow poets at venues around London and the South East. In August 2017, she featured with Cheat Raoul poets at the Edinburgh Free Fringe. A YouTube recording is available if you want to see that. Her first published novel, The Cloud Singer, is a young adult futuristic fantasy looking at the impact of climate change on England's south coast. And finally, Erika Hesketh is a poet and musician based in London. Her poems have been published by the Mum Press, Lunate, and Harana Poetry. During the week, she runs the Poetry Translation Center, a charity dedicated to celebrating contemporary poetry from around the world in English translation. As a director of the Poetry Translation Center, she commissions and edits the books received to be translated. Erika joined the Poetry Translation Center in 2016 from English Pen, where she managed the Writers in Translation program. The Poetry Translation Center latest publication, The Water People, by Venus Kurigata, translated by Will Harris and Delina Haslam as part of the World Poet Series, is the Poetry Book Society's translation choice for autumn 2022. Thank you for being here and participating. And I will now go immediately into the questions that I have prepared for them today. The first question is, in the proposal for this panel, I introduced the topic of having translators' names on the front cover or back cover of books alongside the author's name, and not only in the copyright page. The Society of Authors, through its magazine The Author, launched an initiative last year to recognize translators this way. So my question is, what is your experience of this, either as an author, a translator, or as a publisher? And how about copyright and royalties? Who wants to reply?
Hi, can you hear me? I'm not sure I need that, but anyway. This is one of our recent books, and it has the translator's name. I believe it's really important. It's almost like a new book.
Closer.
I think
It's almost like a new book when somebody has translated it. And so very much our policy should go on, as does any artwork that is used by people. It's very difficult translating, but it's also difficult publishing a translation. Very often I don't speak the language that is being translated from, and I cannot talk at all with the author. So I must rely on the translator, and the relationship sometimes is more complicated. And I think that's one of the big challenges for a press. Also, you are very often buying foreign rights. There are lots of contracts involved. It can be very off-putting for a small press if it's an anthology and we have an independent editor who knows all the people who are writing and gets the translations done, there's no problem. But a big book like this is a big challenge.
Thank you. I don't know what you...
No, well, yes, basically, yes. The translator should be on the title page, as it always it is in my case. Every book I translated poetry, my name has been almost the same size. I've tried to make it the same size as the original, but yeah, we are vital. Translators are vital intermediaries between the writer and the reader. We, we have made, not me personally, but translators in general have brought literature alive to millions of people around the world, and to the fact we should share the copyright, or we should have the same copyright as with the author and the publisher, and I think there isn't any problem with that.
I agree with you, Adam, and I also think that translators are writers as well, so they should be recognised as such, and I think it's a great idea to have their names, our names, on the front cover. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone in this room who would disagree with that as a principle. It is true that over the last decade or so, things have really shifted in this regard. Translators are much more visible as artists, as advocates for international literature. They're doing so much off the page as well as on the page. And I think that publishers, starting as always with the small independent ones, and now growing to the bigger houses that are maybe slower to change their ways, but increasingly publishers are recognizing translators as assets in selling a book, as useful for marketing, as useful for all of that, or what happens around the publishing of a book, not just freelancers who do a function, like making an illustration or an index or something. They're actually the artists behind the book itself. And so I think there's many fronts that have been fought along the way, but we're now beginning to see that change. The Poetry Translation Centre always puts the translators on the cover. Obviously, translators are central to what we do, and we also offer royalties against an advance against royalties.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, as Leo said, translators are writers. What else? We are rewriting a book in another language. I just wanted to point out the name of the campaign by the SOA, Society of Authors. It's Name the Translator, and if you are on social media, please use the hashtag if you're talking about a translation or that you're working on a translation. It's hashtag Name the Translator and hashtag Translators on the cover. And it's very interesting that the SOA mentioned it's not only about the cover, it's about when you're reviewing a translation, when you're discussing a translation. They said, we urge newspapers, reviewers and publishers to prominently display the name of the translator when mentioning, selling or reviewing books. So it must be included in any, as I said, in any review and so on. And your name is your brand, and you can actually copyright or trademark your name. Whether as a writer, I have copyrighted, I have trademarked my name, so nobody else can use it, I'm sorry to say, and it's very important that they know you, and you're on the cover, and you're, sorry.
So, gathering from your answers, then it is a good idea, it is a right, actually, of writers and translators to be on the front cover or even on the back cover. Yeah, and copyright. Front cover, yeah. But lately, with Victorina Press, we've put them in the front cover now, following the trend. But before, big companies didn't want that. But small independent publishers are actually at the front.
Yeah.
So that's something that we need to...
Zine is very often where you see the book
Exactly, yeah.
in a bookshop or something. So
Okay.
yeah, also.
Second question. There are various literary genres, as you know. So I imagine that there are differences in the skills used to translate. For example, poetry and novels. There must be different skills there. So do you attempt any translation, or do you stick to one genre? Do you have to be a poet or writer yourself to be a translator? I think that has already been answered, but why? Adam?
Well, I love translating. In fact, last night I was playing four-hands piano with my cousin in East London, and before that we solved the Guardian crossword. And the feeling of solving the crossword is very similar to the delight at solving or producing a successful translation of a poem. Very similar emotionally. And the process is quite similar, I found. So, but I've done all sorts, and I've even translated a Peruvian treatise on artificial limbs. That was probably my least, not one of my favourite translations, but I got through it, and I learned a lot. I normally translate poetry, mainly, but I have translated recently a Colombian short story and a Cuban short story for Camilla Press, the anthology they came out recently. I think prose is very difficult to translate because in the same way that you have to capture the rhythm and the music of a poem, the same applies to prose. The same applies exactly to prose. There's a lot of rhythm in prose, if it's good prose. And it's difficult. So on the second part, definitely it helps to be a poet, but there are cases, examples of good poets that make bad translators. Yeah, okay. Could you save me from giving examples and being sued? But,
Sorry, I couldn't say. Leo, do you want to say something?
Yeah. Well, I am a poet, and I translate only poetry, and I never translated prose. I don't know why. I think it kind of comes naturally to me to translate poetry. And in fact, I was talking with a fellow translator yesterday, Annie McDermott, and we were saying, you know, there's so many poets are translators, and yet, you know, translators that translate prose don't necessarily are fiction writers. And I wonder why is that the case? And she was saying, well, you know, because poetry is less, you know, less people read poetry, apparently. She was saying, yeah. Yeah.
I would, from the publisher side, or from the privileged position of working with poets and translators, I'd say both poets and translators are the closest possible readers of language. So actually writing poetry and translating any kind of work uses similar sorts of, you know, that fascination and delight in language as a material. Those are things that translators and poets have in common. So I'm not surprised that there's overlap between translators and poets that maybe isn't with novelists, say. Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, I recently translated the Diana Bellesi book, and she came to the UK, and we were discussing with Diana. She's a really well-known translator of North American poets, female poets, and she published this wonderful anthology. And she was saying to me that those translations really inspired her to write many of her books, and sort of informed her work as well. So there's this kind of, you know, sort of cross-pollination between translation and poetry. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that once you're a translator, you're always a translator. And a good text, whether it's poetry or, as Adam was saying, prose, it has to be adequately translated. You can transfer the technique for translating poetry to documentary translation. You could transfer the technique for translating legal to literary translation. I have, whether it's a blessing or a curse, I have the experience of working from documentary translation, legal, scientific, whatever, to poetry and prose. I'm also a writer. And I can tell you that everything is useful. It doesn't make you less of a poet if you've specialized in documentary translation, as I have when I was working for a UN agency here in London as a translator and terminologist. So the final result is what counts, and it has to be convincing. It has to be it has to have rhythm, because even prose and even scientific language and even legal language has a rhythm. And it has to sound like an original. You mustn't forget, there was a school of thought in the old days that translations had to sound like a translation, and that's all I'm glad to say obliterated from the face of the earth. All translations have to sound like a beautiful original.
Thank you. Do you want to say anything, Camilla?
No, I was just echoing what you said. It's really important that the thing, if you picked it up in a bookshop, you would not think this is a translation. You would think this is a very special story or poem.
Thank you. Okay. I'm very sorry. It's not my rules. I'm not like this always. But they have to close at 5. So thank you very much for attending this panel. Thank you, the participants.
Thank you very much.